What's up, guys? It's Patricia from tarantulaheaven.com, and right here we have Miss Spidey. She's being really cute and sweet. She is my G Rosea, and she is fortunately in a good spot today to where you guys can see her and maybe she will move. But anyway, today I wanted to talk about the best substrate for tarantulas. Now, of course, this is going to depend on your type of tarantula. I often get questions about the kind of substrate that Spidey is on because I think she looks at peace most of the time. And as you can see, I have quite a lot of it in here. And people ask all the time, you know, what's the best substrate for my spider? My spider looks just like yours. What kind of substrate do you use? So yes, this does depend on the kind of tarantula you have. Some tarantulas, because we have to consider where did they come from, meaning what part of the world is their species from, what's the natural habitat of this species and this place in the environment where they are from. Spidey is a Chilean rosehair, and therefore she comes from a very desert-like habitat, very dry, like deserts are. And so she actually is on 100% dry substrate. She does not like any type of wetness on her substrate. It's really interesting because she really loves to put her toes in her water dish. And so to some extent, she does enjoy the water. However, she does not like at all to be on moist substrate. There have been times in the beginning of her care where I would by accident overflow her water dish, either because I was being careless or because I thought she might like it, and she absolutely hated it. Now that I give her 100% dry substrate, she is much more comfortable and she quite enjoys it. So she is on, or I think it's called cocoa fiber substrate. I use the loose type. I used to get the bricks. However, I found that the bricks, because you have to moisten them with a lot of water to get them to pull apart, it was really time consuming, very messy, and also the moisture it wouldn't dry very quickly. So I know some people bake the substrate when it's the bricks to kind of dry it out, but to me that was a very labor intensive process, and so sometimes her substrate would have a little bit of moisture and she absolutely hated it. She would climb on her hide, she would climb the walls, which, you know, is a no-no for terrestrial tarantulas. And so I realized that she just really hates moisture. And I think that is true for many tarantulas that come from very dry, desert-like areas, and particularly Grammostola roseas. However, some tarantulas might need more moisture, and so you really have to look at what your tarantula's needs are. So coconut husk or cocoa fiber substrate is not the only type. A lot of people very successfully use things like peat moss, topsoil, vermiculite. Not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but that is also something that people will often mix into their substrate just to kind of give it a little bit more body and hold some moisture. People also use different types of moss as well. More experienced tarantula owners might actually make a mix of things. So it might be a little bit of cocoa fiber substrate, or it might be with some peat moss and mixing in some topsoil as well. Very, very popular. And sometimes that can be more cost effective too, to kind of like stretch, because as you can see, some tarantulas need a lot of substrate. Terrestrials in particular do not need to have major gaps between themselves and the top of their tank, because they can get naughty and climb, and you don't want them to fall down because they are not aware that they're not supposed to be climbing. So you want to make sure that the gap between like the lid and the substrate is no bigger than like what the tarantula's leg span can actually reach, because in case they do fall, like, you want to make sure that they're able to get down, or that they're not going to fall very far. And I know that Spidey looks a little bit small where she is right now, but if she were to stretch out, she's actually a very leggy girl and is quite large. So this, believe it or not, is she could actually, her leg span would reach this entire thing. But anyway, so you want to make sure that you have enough substrate for especially your terrestrial, and also especially if you have a tarantula that likes to burrow. My Arizona blonde Blinky loves to make tunnels, and I think this tarantula would be absolutely miserable if I didn't give them enough substrate. This thing likes to live underground, so if you have a tarantula, you have to consider that too, is like how much substrate. and what is the moisture level of this substrate where the spider is going to be comfortable. You really want to mimic what they would have in the wild. And Spidey has tons of substrate because, one, she's in a massive tank, and this tank is not completely needed for a tarantula of her size or her species. Rose hares can typically live in a smaller tank, but she's got lots of different areas that she likes to use. She also has an underground layer underneath this. So this obviously takes up a lot of substrate. So that's why some people might use more topsoil in there to kind of make the cocoa fiber stretch. They might also, if they're going to be creating like a few inches of substrate, they might actually put something on the bottom to kind of prop the substrate up. So I've seen people like put boxes on the bottom so that you don't need to use a lot of space in the substrate. Some people would look at this and be like, wow, that's a lot of waste of substrate, considering that the tarantula will never touch the bottom layers, but that is what I had for this particular tank design. And there is a part in the back that is not substrate because she has a little dome that is an underground tunnel. So I did manage to save some substrate there. And I think I used like maybe one of those huge bag and a halves of the substrate. So you have to think about your cost and what is the smartest way to do your enclosure and make your substrate worth it. You also want to make sure that you are getting safe substrate, so things that you should definitely not use. And I think that new tarantula owners really do make these mistakes quite often. I see in the groups all the time, and unfortunately, I don't think we're very kind to them as tarantula owners who have maybe been in the hobby for a few years or just maybe more well-researched. I think we make a lot of assumptions too. I think that the pet stores they give the tarantula probably in less than ideal conditions, or you might have acquired the tarantula from somebody who didn't know how to take care of it, and we kind of jump to the assumption that this person is the reason that their tarantula is in an enclosure with sand, when maybe they're looking for advice of like, how can I fix this? So I understand why we might jump and get upset, because I think all of us tarantula lovers really do care about, obviously we care about these creatures and we want them to be in a comfortable environment as soon as possible. And we're quick to correct, right? But many of us will make mistakes. Many of us will accidentally put our tarantulas on sand, gravel, pebbles, wood chips, mud, plastic types of, I guess, substrates, or plastic, what is the word I'm looking for? Like things that you would use in a fish aquarium or something like that, or decorations, like plastic balls or things like that I cannot find the word for, but yes, so might look nice, definitely not healthy for the tarantula, and definitely not something that they would like to touch. Tarantulas are incredibly sensitive to what their little precious spider paws touch, and if they don't like something, that will lead to some behaviors that you're not going to like. One, the tarantula is going to be stressed out like crazy, so they might be kicking their hairs off and have bald spots. They might also be in danger. Maybe there's something pointy in the substrate, or maybe there's sharp edges on the wood chips or something like that. Things like rocks can have this kind of thing. Tarantulas may also climb the walls of their tank, which can also be very dangerous if your tarantula is not an arboreal. And another thing I'd like to point out is, some people will look at this kind of substrate and say, oh, it looks like it's the consistency of very dry dirt, or, let me go in my backyard and get some dirt. No. Please don't do that. I know that tarantulas in the wild will make dirt burrows, or they will, coexist in dirt, or they will actually live in dirt, and I completely understand. However, tarantulas would not usually live around us. And what we do to our environment is use pesticides. We really do kind of infringe on the natural environment. And so I think that the nice thing about using something like this versus the dirt in your backyard is that there probably are no pesticides. It's likely very safe, no pests in there. I think that's another thing, that if you are having a tarantula in captivity, you are responsible for providing this tarantula a safe environment. And so you want to make sure that you're not getting bugs or dirt from your backyard, because you don't want to have an issue where your tarantula might get hurt by a pest or actually get a disease from a pest or something like that. You also don't want to hurt your tarantula with pesticides or other chemicals that it might have gotten in contact with. Many of us live in very litter-filled areas, so you also don't want to take the chance that there might be glass in your dirt if you're not sifting it very well. So I would say that especially if you live in a very busy area, you know, I would say probably the only safe bet is if you're like in the middle of nowhere where humans like don't treat their stuff, don't treat their plants, their dirt or whatever, but I don't think many of us can say that. So I would say Substrate's probably the easiest and safest way for you to ensure that your tarantula is not going to come in contact with anything that's going to be really harmful for them. So please don't use dirt from your backyard or your garden because that's likely not appropriate. Topsoil, I think that you can buy if you're going to use topsoil. I think that, you know, you can kind of be assured that there aren't any really harmful chemicals, and you can certainly look for some very healthy topsoil that's not going to hurt your tarantula. So those are some ideas for Substrate and what is out there. I hope that this helps, especially newer tarantula owners who, you know, might have gotten some really bad advice from a pet store or somebody who didn't know what they were doing, and they thought that maybe their tarantula might like to live on cat litter or or gravel or something like that. They don't. They need very soft, nice dirt, and I think that, you know, yes, they would, you know, be completely okay in the wild in like some very strange conditions. They would live through it, but I do think that if we're going to keep these animals in captivity, we have to increase their chances of survival, and also really be mindful that we should be creating something that's quite natural for them. And I realize that that's quite ironic as I look in the camera viewer and I see that Spidey has like colorful toys or whatever. Very strange for me to say that, right? But I think as far as the substrate and the humidity levels and the amount of moisture that's around them, we, you know, should do our best. But anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed this, and I hope it's helpful to you. And I will talk to you next week for Tarantula Tuesday. Take care. Bye-bye.